you hear me now?
I can hear you. We don't have the PA system on yet, but Jake is going to check sound, so if you don't mind waiting a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
I started reading that article Frank sent.
It goes on and on, but
Yeah, I got into it, and then I was like, I better see how long this is going to take. I was like,
Okay, that's great.
Okay, thanks. Remember, your microphone is on at all times. Speaking
Okay, and I'll try to put you on mute so I don't disturb anybody.
Okay.
don't breathe into the phone.
Right.
Hey, Chris. Going to go ahead and call this November 5th, 2018 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks everyone for coming. Councilor Fury and Councilor Williams are excused. They could not be here this evening, but we do have Councilor Sweeney on our virtual existence line from Salt Lake City. It's pretty painful to be calling into a city council meeting from the phone, so I wanted to thank Frank for extending his attendance this evening. With that said, I do have two agenda changes I would like to make. Following our consent agenda, which is item 5 of the meeting, I will be moving item 7A, which is resolution 18-43 regarding the annexation, the intent to consider annexation of Park Knoll. I will be moving that up after item 5. Again, that's item 7A. Following that, I will be moving as well item 8A, which is consideration of a request to establish 2 accessible parking stalls on Baker Avenue as well to help expedite that decision this evening. With that said, we will start with our Pledge of Allegiance, and I will ask Jim Stack to lead us, and I think he knew that was coming. Thanks, Jim. Building looks great, by the way. I see you're very close to the end, which I'm sure is a big relief, so congratulations on that. We will stay with the public. Any communications from the public tonight? This is your opportunity to comment on items that are on the agenda but not advertised as a public hearing. If you are here to speak on behalf of Park Knoll regarding item 7A of the agenda, now would be your opportunity. With that said, we'll start with public comment, and we'll start with Rebecca.
Good evening, Council. Rebecca Norton, 530 Scott Avenue. I just wanted to come back and let you know that we are working on the footbridge erosion. Karen Hilding met with us, as well as Maria. There's funding through the storm water drainage budget somehow. They're doing a surveying. Bruce Booty was there too, so they're going to look at that design. And Greg Gunderson's involved, but it's a little unclear to me about the funding, because I guess if you have only $25,000 to spend, you can not get bids. I think it might be more than that. And anyways, I really think we need to start looking at the erosion all along the riverbank too, because we're probably going to be getting more high water years. So I still haven't had copies given to me yet of the files. What I found out is that we did not have a landscaping plan in place. We had 4 agencies that were signing off on it, but part of the problem was that we had limited funding, and so one of the deals was that they weren't supposed to have to give us a landscaping plan. And so that just got passed on every year where we weren't having it funded. So it'd be nice if a hydrologist could look at it at some point. But the other thing that I just would like to say is tomorrow is the day that we all vote. I attended a lot of the meetings with the county concerning our corridor planning and the taking of the donut. I know the whole backstory. And recently I have met with Tom Clark, who's running for county commission, and I think he would be very easy to work with. So I just wanted to say, if any of you or anybody in the community have not voted yet and haven't decided who, I think he would be a very moderate person.
Pardon me.
Is that
Point of order,
inappropriate to
please.
say it? Because it's a partisan discussion. I
Richard?
think
As a point of order, sorry, Rebecca, but this is not, encouraging folks to vote is appropriate, but I think choosing one candidate over another is not.
I know, but I think your 3 minutes, you can also speak to whatever you want legally. So I think it's, after living through it, it's very important to me that we get good leadership at the county level. So that's why I'm pushing this issue a little bit. Sorry. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Appreciate your comments tonight. Chris?
Good evening. My name is Chris Schustrom. I live at 504 Spokane Avenue. Just wanted to let the council, the city staff, everyone in the audience, and everyone in city council TV land know that we, the community, will be hanging the winter decorations on Sunday, November 18th. Volunteers should meet at 8:30 a.m. at the corner of 3rd and Central. And we're very excited. We've got 2 new light strings built for the new block of Central Avenue. So we'll be hanging a new string across the mid-block next to Great Northern Cycle and also at the north side of 3rd or 4th and Central. So our downtown is vibrant for another block south. Also wanted to let you know this is the 68th year of this project, and it's pretty great having all the volunteers help out with it, and hope to see you all then. Thank you.
And this is through Whitefish Shines, correct?
Yeah, Whitefish Shines.
Correct.
Yep, so all volunteer project. Yep.
Thank you for your work
Yeah, you're
on that,
welcome.
Chris, every year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jim?
Good evening, Council. We're Jim and Lisa Stack. We live at 2472 Birch Glen in Whitefish. And yes, we are building a commercial office on Wisconsin Avenue for a very long time. We just stopped by tonight to say hi.
Actually, we stopped by to say thank you to all the city staff. This week, we hope to get our certificate of occupancy for our new offices at 625 Wisconsin and to be fully moved in and operational by the end of next week. So we're very excited about that.
It was almost 2 years ago when we first came to the city, actually 1 year and 11 months for the initial site review. It is a very technically advanced building. It is 100% LED. It has over 5 miles of Cat6 wires. All the communication is microwave. A lot of the technology, some of the technology in the building didn't even exist when we started construction on the building. It is ultra energy efficient, and yes, the lights will be turned down on it once we get full control this week.
Sorry about that part.
Dark skies.
There are some folks that we would like to specifically thank with the city. First of all, Public Works, Craig Workman and Karen Hilding for helping us to get into the ground with utilities. It was a
That was
a
a
huge step,
big hurdle, and Craig was phenomenal.
we appreciate it very much. Planning Department, Bailey, and Wendy, walking book of knowledge. They guided us through the entire process, directed us to the people that we needed to speak with. And Tad Lasowski, the building inspector, anytime we had a problem on the job, any question that we had, he was tough, but he was fair. And he provided us with the answers that we needed to move forward.
I also see Joe Page over here. And both Joe and Fire Marshal Travis Tite, they looked at our plans, they stepped us through the process, the building is fully sprinkled, and the suggestions they made significantly improved the project. I can't tell you how helpful the city staff has been throughout this entire process.
They made it better and compliant at the same time, and that was huge. And last but not least, Parks and Rec, Maria Butts with Jen and Steve.
We coordinated, we envisioned this as a partnership with the adjacent park, with Mountain Trail Park. And we went into this with that vision. We contributed significantly toward the snow bus pullout. All of the landscaping on the south end of that park was all donated by us and our subcontractors to create a flow from the park directly into our landscaping to give the park a larger image, a larger vision, and a larger footprint. And it's a widely used park. I can't tell you how often that's used through the summer. It's a value to the city. We continue to plan to contribute to that park on an annual basis from a donation standpoint for improvements. It's a great asset to the city of Whitefish.
And we really want to maintain that partnership.
It would be remiss in not saying some processes can be improved. It's a very short building season. But those should probably be saved for a one-on-one with the council. There are a few regulations that present roadblocks to a building like this that don't necessarily have to be eased, but they can be addressed in a manner that would allow a building like this to be built more easily rather than just a two-story flat roof that you see on so many commercial buildings. It'd be very minor changes on that. But again, I think we'll save those for a one-on-one.
We do want to invite the City Council and coordinating staff to an open house. We will let you know when that date might occur sometime in December.
Yeah, once the dust has settled.
It was supposed to be July 1st.
You didn't say which year.
So again, thank you. We just want to express thank you to all the city staff.
It's been a pleasure
The
working with you all.
regulations are well thought out. Some of them can be improved, but the staff that we dealt with cannot be improved upon. They were phenomenal.
I want to thank you for taking the time to come tonight. It's not often that we actually get folks come acknowledge the hard work of our staff, and it's certainly appreciated when we do get those opportunities. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further comment from the public this evening? Charlie.
Mr. Mayor, City Council members, Charlie Duffy, 117 Park Knoll Lane. Two quick things, one of which is annexation of Park Knoll, the proposal for the meeting today. I'd like to thank, first of all, Mr. Hammett and Ms. Jacobs. They were kind enough to take the time out of their busy schedule to sit down with me a few weeks back, and I really appreciate you doing that. My concern is that it seems like we're not getting anything in return. The street won't be improved. The city services won't be improved. We're on an inadequate water main right now. I believe it's a 4-inch to 2-inch or 2-inch to 4-inch, where the folks on the southern end of the neighborhood are decreasing water pressure pretty significantly. We pay a pretty high premium for that water. The basic water rate, I believe, is more than an average citizen in downtown Whitefish. So we're paying our fair share of the city water. We have an inadequate system. We're not allowed to get a sewer system without paying for it at our expense. We're not allowed to get water streets, maintaining of those streets. All we're getting is 16 to 18% increase in our taxes. We live in the city, we use the city parks, we use the infrastructure, I get that. We also pay 3% tax on all the services, being members of the Whitefish community. We pay for the resort tax. So it seems like we're paying $500 to $1,000 more a year for taxes and not getting anything in return. Second question I have for you is for the police chief, and my question is the rifle range that's on the old city property, at the old city landfill. Now living in Park Knoll, I hear the frequency with the gunshots going off. There's children, it's in city limits. Chief Dial was there on Thanksgiving last year just shooting his gun. I just wonder if there's business hours that can be done, if it's an official shooting range, if it's just for the police department, if they can't use the one on Camp Ranch that's more a public site and facility. We walk through to the Assembly of God. We have access to their property. We walk along the boundary of the city property, but there's shell casings all over the ground. There's live ammunition sitting on the ground back there. There's neighborhoods with kids back there. So I'm just curious if the chief of police had an answer, or if it's something that I could just get more information on. And that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie.
You bet.
We'll follow up with
Thank
that.
you. Appreciate that, John.
You bet. Thanks for your comments. Further public comment tonight? Not seeing any. I'll stay with the audience. Any volunteer board reports from the audience? Not seeing any. How about the council? Richard.
Yeah. Today was Bicycle Ped Committee, and we're ready. 4 big items, really, that fall into that. One is the Bike Ped Committee realized we're ready to record a 20-foot easement through the Malmquist Lazar property off of Miles. That'll be about 230 feet plus or minus at a 20-foot. Is that not coming through? That better? Okay. Is that better? You want me to start over? No. Okay. So that's going to be an important link, because that will tie back into the Riverbend condo easement, which is still in the hands of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, but we're hopeful to maybe start construction in the fall. We might be ready for that. Wayfinding signs continue to be refined, but the final plan to be presented at the January Bike Ped meeting. The Bike Ped Committee decided not to meet in December. Looking for a spring installation, but don't miss that presentation in January. Save the date. No, yeah, right. And number 4, another easement, Les Schwab easement survey is complete, and we're just awaiting some easement language on that. There was some discussion then. Here it comes. It's up on the big board there. The crosswalk at 7th and Pine, after a visit by school personnel and Public Works and others, there's a school safety issue, so the school district is looking for a crossing guard. Actually, it takes 2, one on each side when there's a crossing, to fill in until such time as they can complete hiring for a full-time crossing guard. It's 1 hour in the mornings only, because it's still dark then. So you get a reflective vest to wear. You can be a crossing guard and take you right back to, I was a crossing guard when I was in 6th grade. Anyway, if you would, anybody in the listening audience or anyone in this audience, if you would like to be a crossing guard for 1 hour in the morning for a week, and a week only, contact Karen Hilding at the City of Whitefish, or Jenny Emenegger at the City of Whitefish, and they will make that contact. So now's your chance for some public service out there. Anybody wanting to be a crossing guard with a bright vest?
I nominate our retired Deputy Mayor, Richard Hildner.
I am checking my calendar, and by the way, the chair of the Bike Ped Committee has already volunteered a week, and I may work with John on his week. I'm not sure which week it's going to be, and maybe the mayor would like to volunteer as well.
I would. Further volunteer board reports from the council? Not seeing any. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Any changes or additions to the October 15th, 2018 meeting minutes, or can I have a motion for approval, please? Richard.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Seconded by Councillor Hennon. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously.
Did Frank raise his hand too?
Frank?
Please note my hand was up.
All right.
For approval.
Thanks, Frank, and that passes on a 4-0
mute.
vote. We'll move on to item 7A, which is communications from our city attorney. This will be Resolution 18-43, a resolution of the City of Whitefish indicating its intent to consider annexing approximately 22 acres of contiguous land into the city of Whitefish, Montana, describing the land to be so considered, providing for notice and publication as required by law, and providing a date for a public hearing regarding the proposed annexation, and this appears on page 130 of your packet. Angela.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council members, and thank you very much for accommodating my travel schedule by moving me first. My staff report begins on page 135 of your packet. Back in 1989, the Park Knoll Water Association requested that the city extend water service to the Park Knoll subdivision, and the city did so conditioned upon the property owners waiving the right to protest annexation when Park Knoll became contiguous to city limits. And this is something that the city has routinely done. If we provide service to a subdivision, is required that they waive the right to protest for receiving service. So it's been almost 30 years since this happened, and it really just came to our attention when a development group had applied to the city to amend the growth policy, and they were close to Park Knoll, and it was brought up in several public hearings that Park Knoll Lane is a private road, and that it's owned by the homeowners association, and they were not going to allow this development group access to Park Knoll Lane. And so when we were looking at access issues in the project as a whole, it kind of came to our attention that Park Knoll has been on city water, and they'd actually signed these waivers. We looked into it a little bit about why we hadn't annexed them years ago when they became contiguous to city limits. And why we think that we didn't is because our former Public Works Director didn't want to take responsibility for Park Knoll Lane. It's not up to city road standards. I think maybe it's just a misunderstanding on his part about what our responsibility was once we annexed Park Knoll. Annexation just brings property within city limits. It doesn't make it our property. It doesn't make it necessarily the road our responsibility. We've annexed almost all Highway 93, and MDT is still responsible for its maintenance and upkeep. There's other areas that have private roads. Grouse Mountain, all the roads are actually private and allowed to be closed to the public. When we annex them, they still retain maintenance of the roads. So I think maybe the former Public Works Director was just under the misconception that if we annexed the area that we would actually take Park Knoll Road as well. So I believe it was brought to the City Council during your annual goal setting, and direction to staff was to proceed with the annexation. We waited until the City Council had made a decision on the Whitefish 57 project before we moved forward. So where we are right now is just the very initial first step of this process. So under Montana law, we can annex land that's contiguous to city limits by passing a resolution of intent, giving notice, and passing a resolution of annexation. So this is just the very preliminary first step. With respect to contiguous land, if a majority of the property owners protest annexation, we can't move forward for a year. But as I stated earlier, Park Knoll, the property owners, previous property owners, some of them still own land there, signed waivers of protest. So regardless of the method of annexation we use, we need to have an extension of services plan. We have had an extension of services plan since 2009, probably even previous to that. And we updated and revised that extension of services plan in April of this year. So the city's extension of services plan itself requires that a resolution of annexation, not the intention to annex, which is where we are now, set forth the method and time frame for bringing existing conditions in the area annexed into compliance with city standards. And our actual, if the City Council gets to that point, our actual resolution of annexation will do so, but my staff report just contains a quick summary of what services are available, when they'll be provided, and I'd be happy to answer questions about that, although I'm sure Craig would probably be better to answer some of the services about the water and sewer out there. Okay. So one comment that I'd like to add in response to one of the public comments that we received is that Park Knoll Lane would remain a private lane. They would be responsible for the maintenance, for the upkeep. If they wanted to bring it up to city standards, then we would probably take on Park Knoll Lane, but there was some concern raised that if the developers, the Whitefish 57 came back, that we would somehow allow them access to Park Knoll Lane. We couldn't do so. That would remain a private lane. If we wanted to do anything with Park Knoll Lane, we would have to pay for it through eminent domain or through an agreement with the homeowners association. So it would remain a private road. So the resolution of intention is the first step. If the city council approves the resolution of intention, we'll provide written notice to registered voters and property owners in Park Knoll and publish the required notice. The city clerk will accept written comments for a period of 20 days after the date of the first publication, and then the city council will decide whether or not to actually annex Park Knoll on December 3rd after holding a public hearing. There's no immediate financial requirements or impacts of passing the resolution of intention. If the city council ultimately decides to annex Park Knoll, it's estimated that the city will collect an additional $7,367 in property tax assessments based on the fiscal year 17 tax rate. And there is a complete typo in my staff report, and I apologize. It says 6,367, but it's actually 7,367. So with that, staff respectfully recommends that the city council approve the resolution. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks very much, Angie. Any questions for Angie on her staff report, or any questions specific to Craig? I have one, Craig. The comment related to the water main, is that a cast iron main? Are we aware of what that public utility consists of, the size, the limitations, and upon theoretically annexation, is it the city's then responsibility to upgrade that line if needed?
So as it exists right now, Park Knoll is served by a 6-inch water main that comes off of 18th Street up through the shop and then weaves down around. The subdivision itself is served by a private water meter that branches off into the rest of the homes. So the city currently sends one water bill to Park Knoll, and they distribute it amongst their existing residents. The map that's up on the screen behind you, which I think you guys are also looking at, shows where that city main ends, it necks down to a 4-inch main where it comes into Park Knoll, and I believe the meter itself is at the end of that 4-inch main. Not entirely sure what the material is, but I'm guessing that it's probably PVC. It's definitely not cast iron. It's newer than that. In terms of maintenance, the city maintains the main that's in blue, shown on the map, and we would continue to maintain that. I'm guessing the issue with water pressure that Mr. Duffy was referring to was probably on the south end of Park Knoll. So I'm not familiar with the private main that extends off of that pipe, but we can research that and see if there's ways that we can increase the pressure. It isn't currently in the plan, though, to replace that private main and take over the ownership.
So the billing will still, if indeed this property is annexed, would the billing still go to the homeowners association and then delved out from there, or would we be doing individual billings with individual meters?
At this point, we don't have plans to change the billing system. We could tie each individual home into a water service, but that would be a significant project, and we probably want to put together a budget and a cost estimate for that.
Okay. Thanks, Craig. Further questions for staff? Motion? Ryan?
I would move to approve resolution number 18-43, a resolution of the City of Whitefish indicating its intent to consider annexing approximately 22 acres of contiguous land into the City of Whitefish, Montana, describing the land to be so considered, providing for notice and publication as required by law, and providing a date for a public hearing regarding the proposed annexation.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Melissa. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Frank?
I voted aye.
Okay, and that motion passes on a 4-0 vote in the affirmative. Michelle? Thanks, Angie. You are excused. Have a great trip. Be safe. As noted, we're going to go ahead and move up item 8A, which is communications from Craig Workman, our Public Works Director. We have one item Item 8A, which is consideration of a request to establish 2 accessible parking stalls located on Baker Avenue. Craig.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The city received a request from Reverend Kenneth Fortney from St. Charles Borromeo. Reverend Ken is in the audience tonight. The request was for 2 designated ADA stalls along Baker Avenue in front of the church. I can tell you that the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, gives very clear direction on new parking lots, but it's very vague when it comes to on-street parking. And so for that reason, staff likes to come to council to discuss these issues prior to designating on-street parking as ADA, because it does affect the broader public. However, according to Reverend Fortney, there are a number of elderly members of the parish that would definitely benefit from having these 2 parking stalls designated as handicapped or accessible, and so I'm providing you with this recommendation. There are 2 curb ramps, which I've shown in my staff report, along Baker Avenue adjacent to the church, which would, I think, make for the best locations for these 2 ADA stalls. As I mentioned, those are depicted. There's another map that shows kind of the overall aerial overview of the neighborhood, so you get an idea of where we're talking about. The cost to take care of this or to designate these stalls would be approximately $100. That would include the signage, the paint, and the staff time, and it would be advised that that come out of the city's street fund. So staff has reviewed this, and we do recommend making these 2 proposed stalls ADA accessible for those that do have a handicap placard. I think that not only would it be beneficial to the church, but also to other local businesses, Glacier Bank and others in the area.
Thank you, Craig. Reverend Fortney, do you have anything to add?
You said it very well.
Okay, thanks for coming tonight. Yep. Motion? Questions for Craig? Richard.
I'll go ahead and move to approve the request for the establishment of 2 accessible parking stalls on Baker Avenue as so indicated on the attached maps to our packet. Is that sufficient information?
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Hennon. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Frank?
I vote, and I vote aye.
Thank you, Frank. And that passes on a 4-0 vote as well. Michelle? Thanks, Craig. That now brings us back to our 3 scheduled public hearings for this evening. We will start with item 6A, which is consideration of approving an application from Ron Thiessen for a conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment located at 718 3rd Street West, which is currently zoned WR1, which is our 1-family residential district. Bailey.
Hi, good evening. So the applicant is requesting a conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment that's going to be adjacent to a future single-family residence. The subject property is currently undeveloped, and the applicant is looking to construct the main house at the same time as the accessory apartment. So they are coming in before the single family is built, like we currently see. The accessory apartment would be attached to a proposed garage on the side of the subject property. It would be under the 600 square feet minimum allowance, approximately 576 square feet, so a standard 2-car garage. Setback measurements were not shown on the submitted site plan. However, the footprint of the garage, because the footprint of the garage is less than the 600 square feet, they could reduce the side property lines down to 6 feet. However, I will make a note, one, that those setbacks would be looked at the time of building permit. We also discovered through some public comment that was submitted, there is an access easement on that side, so there more than likely would not be reducing the setback. It would actually be more than what they would be required due to that easement location. So No reduction to the front setback is permitted, and that's 25 feet from the front property line. So the subject property is approximately 0.326 acres, so it does meet our minimum lot size for the WR1 zoning. It is zoned, as I said, WR1, which is our one-family residential district. It's surrounded by residential uses on all sides. The growth policy designation is urban, which does correspond to the WR1 as well. It'll be connected to all city services. We did mail a notice to adjacent landowners within 150 feet on September 27th. We noticed advisory agencies and also placed a legal in the Whitefish pilot on October 3rd. And I've only had 2 comments that have been received, and both in support of the project. So the development is consistent with the purpose and intent of the regulations, and that is section 11.3.1 of our zoning describes the accessory apartment standards, and it appears to meet those standards. As I said, it'll be accessory to a single-family use. All adequate parking will be provided on site. Setbacks, again, will be confirmed at the time of building permit. It is proposed to access off of West 3rd Street, and the first 80 feet of a new driveway is required to be paved under our zoning regulations. Let's see. As I've mentioned previously in past projects for these types of similar uses that we've been seeing more and more of over the past couple of years, the zoning regulations requires 2 parking spaces for the single-family home and then 1 additional off-street parking space for the accessory parking. And as I mentioned, there's that utility easement that was brought up during one of the public comments. And so they are showing parking on their site plan in that easement area, but the applicant has been made aware of that, and he is proposing to move that. And that will be confirmed at the time of building permit as well. So they're not parking in a future road easement. Let's see. The zoning regulations exempt single-family and accessory apartments from landscaping requirements, so there's no landscaping conditions that are proposed. As I said, it can be served by municipal water and sewer off of, it's actually, the water will come off of West 2nd down. That's why there's that long, skinny kind of flag part of it, is because that's actually where their water and sewer is coming off of. Stormwater drainage would be reviewed by Public Works at the time of a building permit if they exceed the 5,000 square feet thresholds, and that would be reviewed at that time. Traffic impacts are anticipated to be minimal. It does include, as I said, a single-family residence in the future. It's located within an existing neighborhood of the same uses. It will comply with lot coverage and height requirements of the zoning. That will also be confirmed at the time of building permit. The existing neighborhood is a mixture of single-family residential with some commercial along West 2nd. The proposed use is not expected to impact or change the character of the existing neighborhood and is consistent with those uses that are in there. So, staff is recommending approval of the application with 11 conditions that I've attached to the staff report. The Whitefish Planning Board met on October 18th and considered the request. There were 2 members of the public that spoke at the public hearing. 1 was in favor and 1 in opposition, and those draft minutes were attached as part of your packet for you to review. And then following the hearing, the Planning Board did vote 4-1 to recommend approval of the application to the City Council. And so I'm happy to answer questions if you guys have any.
Thanks, Bailey. Any questions for Bailey on our staff report? Not seeing any. We did advertise for this conditional use permit located at 718 3rd Street West. Is there any public comment this evening on this item? Any public comment on this item? Not seeing any. I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion or comment. Richard.
I'll go ahead and move to approve the application from Ross Thiessen for a conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment located at 718 3rd Street West, Zone WR1, 1 family, residential, as proposed by staff.
Thank you, Richard. Is there a second to the motion? I will second. I'm going to give it to Frank just because he really tried there. Seconded by Councillor Sweeney. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Frank?
I vote aye.
Thank you, Frank. And the motion passes on a 4-0 vote, Michelle. Which brings us quickly on to item 6B, which will be ordinance 18-34, an ordinance of the City of Whitefish, Montana, rezoning approximately 2 acres of land located at 519, 523, and 525 Skiles Place from WB1, which is our limited business district, to WR4, which is our high-density multifamily residential district, and adopting findings with respect to such rezone, and this will be on a first reading. Dave.
Rezone is to help facilitate what was designated as multifamily in the Wisconsin Avenue Corridor Plan. When that plan was approved, it amended the future land use map of the city, and it's changed the future land use map for those parcels from what was previously a neighborhood business designation to a multifamily designation, which this WR4 zoning that they've applied for does comply with. And they intend to possibly redevelop the property with some multifamily housing. Currently, there's auto repair place and a boat storage facility on that site. So the WR4 zone that they're asking for, it's intended for higher density residential purposes and limited non-residential uses on major thoroughfares, which this wouldn't apply to. Again, as mentioned, it's a 2-acre site. And as I mentioned, it does have an existing boat storage and auto repair facility, which has some sort of limited compatibility with the neighborhood, although it's been there a long time. Around that property, there's currently multifamily residential directly to the west, single-family residential to the north, some neighborhood commercial to the east along Wisconsin, and then more multifamily to the south. So one of the things that we do is we review it according to certain criteria under state law and put together findings of fact. One of the criteria is this change made in accordance with the growth policy. And as I mentioned, the Wisconsin Avenue Corridor Plan, which is an amendment or an addendum to our growth policy, did redesignate this parcel last spring to multifamily residential, so it is compatible with that. It does also meet some of the goals of our strategic housing plan by providing some additional workforce housing opportunities with multifamily development in that neighborhood. And so our first recommended finding one is that the proposed change is in accordance with the growth policy because it complies with the land use designation designated in the 2018 amendment to the growth policy, the Wisconsin Avenue Plan. There's other criteria, which I'm not going to go through all of them. Does it secure from safety, fire, and panic? Some of those things aren't necessarily reviewable at this time, but we will look at those standards when a new building permit or conditional use permit comes forward as that property redevelops. As far as the facilitation of transportation, water, sewerage, again, that stuff will be reviewed when it does redevelop, but currently there's under finding 4, it'd say the proposed zone change facilitates the adequate provision of transportation, water, sewage, schools, parks, and other public requirements because it's located inside city limits and all public services and facilities are available. Its effect on motorized and non-motorized transportation systems. I mean, currently the rezone won't have any effect on that. When that property is redeveloped, we will look at that. Potentially a new use if it has more than 200 vehicle trips per day, we would look at requiring a traffic impact study. As far as compatible with urban growth, again, it's part of our growth policy, and it is within city limits, served by public services. As far as the district goes, again, it's surrounded by existing multifamily, single family, so the WR4 zoning, which surrounds that property, is consistent. And I will mention that a couple of those lots are split. They have split zoning. Half of them are already WR4, and the remainder WB1, which makes it difficult to develop according to our rules. And so this does fix that. 2 out of the 3 lots having split zoning, that'll go away, and they'll all be consistently zoned WR4. One of the other criteria is to conserve the value of buildings. Again, that's somewhat subjective. However, I think any kind of redevelopment of that property, which currently has a storage facility, should increase the property values around that. As far as encouraging the most appropriate use of land throughout the jurisdiction, again, it was a designated multifamily Wisconsin Avenue Plan, and it is an appropriate land use according to our growth policy. And then looking at historical use patterns, the historical use of the commercial storage and auto repair, while it has fit into that neighborhood for a long time, I think this redevelopment is appropriate. And the change to high-density residential will help promote the goals of the strategic housing plan by providing more residential units. So all in all, staff did recommend approval to the Whitefish Planning Board. We held a public hearing. At the public hearing on October 18th, the applicant spoke. We had one neighbor that was somewhat unfamiliar with their own zoning there that asked a few questions at the meeting, and we're a little bit concerned that taller buildings might look down on their yard. We also received one letter from an email from Hunter Dominic that was concerned about additional traffic on Wisconsin Avenue. After the public hearing, the planning board met, discussed it, and they unanimously voted to recommend approval of the project. And I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Director Taylor? Not seeing any. We did advertise for what will be ordinance 18-34, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Is the applicant or the applicant's representative here, and would you like to provide additional comment? Mark, correct? Yeah. All right. Good to see you.
Mr. Mayor, council members, my name is Mark Johnson, 680 Stone Street. I'm the project architect. We originally came to this project in February, started researching for the owner his anticipated desire to redevelop the commercial aspects of the property. As Dave mentioned, there's a mix of zoning in there. Some lots are split zoned, multifamily and business. The zoning was originally adopted from an existing business that was on the property at the time the zoning was adopted. That was some time ago. The owner is interested in redeveloping all of it into residential, multifamily residential. We attended the Wisconsin Avenue Quarter Plan. We were in here originally when they were in the approval phase. When we became aware of the zoning complications with the business aspect. The Wisconsin Avenue Quarter Plan looked at the project. It's essentially surrounded by high-density residential, was at that time, so the land use designation was changed, which supported then a request for a zone change of changing the commercial property into the high-density residential. I guess a couple arguments for why this is a good thing. Proximity to downtown is important. It's within walking distance, bicycling distance of downtown. It's an infill development project, which is always beneficial and preferred in more established communities rather than expanding services and facilities into areas where they don't already exist. We can come back into areas that are already developed, ready for redevelopment as uses have changed over time and as needs and desires of landowners change. Redeveloping within the established infrastructure is always less intrusive and more in keeping with the pattern of the development and change of use of a property. The owner's intent is to build long-term workforce housing. This project will essentially be one-bedroom and studio apartments, and will be, I think, beneficial. It's a high-demand element that's in the community right now. They don't have any anticipation or any desire to do more elaborate residential. This is all going to be small-type units. We did chat with a couple of the landowners that were in the adjacent area. They were like our owner, were really unfamiliar with the land use and the zoning of the properties. And they expressed some concern regarding scale and density of the development. At this point, we don't really have any facts that we could give you as far as how many or how big. But we want to be sensitive to the neighborhood and the community, just as we would view it in the same way as if we were a landowner and a development was happening next to us. And with that, I would like to offer to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Mark. Any questions for Mark? Not seeing any.
Great, thank you.
Some might pop up later, though, so, thanks. We'll take public testimony now on this item. Anyone wishing to provide comment on item 8B of the agenda? Any public testimony? We'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to council for a motion. Richard?
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 18-34, an ordinance of the city of Whitefish, Montana, rezoning approximately 2 acres of land located at 519, 523, and 525 Skiles Place from WB1 Limited Business District to WR4 High Density Multifamily Residential District, and adopting findings of fact with respect to such rezone on first reading.
Thank you, Richard. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Melissa. Further discussion on the motion? I will just add that I'm the owner of the property at the corner of Skiles and Wisconsin Avenue, and I think this development and the proposed zone change is certainly compatible with the surrounding land uses that at least I've observed since owning the business and property located on the corner. With that said, any further comment? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Frank?
And I vote aye.
And that passes.
Aye.
Thank you, Frank. And that passes again on a 4-0 vote in the affirmative. Michelle? We will move on to item 6C, which will be ordinance 18-35, an ordinance of the city of Whitefish, Montana, rezoning approximately 0.5 acres of land located at 1820, 1822, 1824, 1828, and 1832 Baker Avenue from WI, which is our industrial and warehousing district, to WI/WB2-SC, which is our industrial and warehousing and secondary business district with a statement of conditions district, and adopting findings with respect to such rezone on a first reading. Dave.
Good evening again. So, yeah, the new owner of 2 of the industrial condo units, the ones at 1820, 1822, recently purchased those. They were unaware that their proposed use of selling refurbished furniture for their nonprofit would not be permitted in that existing WI zoning district. And so we met with that property owner and looked at their options. And we looked at the surrounding zoning and that adjacent zoning that was done several years back, which is a blend of the WI industrial zoning with the secondary business zoning that's directly across the street on Baker Avenue. The adjacent property that kind of surrounds that, as well as the Montana Shirt Company property, all have that WI, WB2 statement of conditions zoning. That's a blend of those 2 uses, and we looked at that, and she made the determination that she would at least apply for a rezone to see if she could also join that zoning, and the other condo owners signed off on the application that own the rest of the condo units on that property. So that zone change would be to the same exact zoning that's adjacent to them, to the south and behind them, where there's a vacant lot and parking area. So basically, with conditional zoning, it allows kind of a transitional zone between different zones, and we have a couple of them in town and a couple areas. Under that section, I'm just going to read this so that you can kind of get an idea what conditional zoning is. It's in the event that it's found to be in the best interest of the city as well as advantageous to property owners seeking a change in zoning boundaries, if certain more restrictive conditions were proposed by property owners as part of their request for rezoning, an owner of land may voluntarily offer in writing conditions relating to the use or development, which is a statement of conditions. And then the council, when they review that, shall consider the compatibility of the allowed uses and the performance of the conditional restrictions along with the intent of the underlying future land use shown for the parcel, rather than strict adherence to the growth policy land use designations such as commercial or residential. And so the applicant has asked for, again, it's the same zoning as next door, but within that statement of conditions, it would allow several uses from the WB2 zone, which includes antique stores, automobile sales, furniture and floor covering stores, grocery stores, laundry, machinery and equipment sales, medical clinic, and a restaurant. And then under conditional uses, it would require a conditional use permit for any building over 15,000 square feet. And then out of the WI zone, what it currently is, a bunch of the uses will be removed, but the following uses will be kept in there, which is automobile sales, janitorial services, light industrial manufacturing, office space, parcel delivery, petroleum products and tire sales, and then under the conditional uses, microbreweries would remain permitted. And as you guys may recall, in 2015, this particular property was part of a rezone request that also included the adjacent properties around it to slightly modify that district with the statement of conditions. And then with that request, they were asking to add 3 additional uses, which included music schools, trade schools, and hotels. And that particular request was denied by the city council, mostly because they didn't feel like that was an appropriate location for a hotel. But as I mentioned, this proposal doesn't add hotels or any other uses. It's just asking for the same zoning adjacent that's existing. So under the review, under the growth policy, as I mentioned, it's planned industrial is the growth policy designation for that area, which includes several different zoning types. And since there is industrial as part of this, as well as some secondary business, it is compatible with that planned industrial future land use. Again, the code doesn't require strict adherence to the future land use, but it looks at kind of how it performs within the context of that district, which we feel it does since the adjacent zoning is compatible and similar. Shouldn't have any effect on congestion. The property's not going to be redeveloped. It has an existing building on there that was recently remodeled into 6 condo units. It's within city limits, so there's no impact of fire, safety, panic. Very close to the emergency services center. Promoting health and general welfare, again, it's within city limits. If there is any modifications to that site, they'd be reviewed under city zoning and building standards. As far as overcrowding of land, avoiding the concentration of people, and again, it's within a business park type of a development. There's no residential use plan for that particular property. Does the zoning give a reasonable consideration to the character of the district? The allowed the uses that are permitted in there are consistent with adjacent uses and the existing character of the district. Again, right across Baker Avenue is WB2. It's WI directly to the north, and then it had that existing zoning with the statement of conditions that surrounds it. As far as conserving the value of buildings, again, that's subjective. It shouldn't have any impact on the adjacent buildings' property values. And finally, will the new zoning encourage the most appropriate use of land throughout the municipality? Again, it's appropriate within the context of Baker Avenue with the mix of uses that are allowed there currently. And again, the statement of conditions is something that they will sign off on, notarize, that holds them to the zoning uses and setbacks that are allowed under those districts, blending some of the uses from the B2 with the WI zone. This did go to the Whitefish Planning Board on October 18th. The applicant spoke, sort of explained her side of the story. We had one member from the public, Pat Laturel, spoke in favor of the rezone. The planning board discussed it, held the public hearing, and they unanimously recommended approval. And that's where we stand at this point. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave on his staff report? Richard.
Yeah, Dave, you said residential is not planned, but would it be permitted?
It would not be permitted as part of that, no.
All right. Secondly, there's some reference to signage, and there was something wrong with the website when I was trying to access all of the city code today. So what are the sign regulations on the west side of Baker? Are they the same as the 93 corridor zone?
I think it's within the highway district, but I can look it up real quick if you want to just hang on for 1 second.
I couldn't determine whether it was within this highway district or not.
Yeah, the map's not very legible in our code book, but it looks like that's within the highway district. So it'd be the same signage as on the other side of Baker. But again, it's a very illegible map, and so I'd have to look to completely verify it. But you can't tell the streets on this at all.
So is it advisable to add a condition that it would have to comply with all appropriate sign ordinances?
Well, when they would anyway with their sign permit, we would review that when they came in for a sign permit, but you could certainly add a, maybe it's a statement of conditions with the zoning, so it's not like a conditional use permit. So the only, the zoning, when they get a sign permit, we'd look at their sign district and see what kind of signage they're allowed based on their location.
Okay, that satisfies.
Thanks, Richard. Further questions for Dave on his staff report? Not seeing any. We did advertise for what is item 6C or ordinance 18-35, and we will hold that public hearing now. Any public testimony this evening on this item? Any public comment? Not seeing any. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council. Ryan.
I move to approve WZC 18-09 along with the revised statement of conditions in the staff report as recommended by the Whitefish Planning Board.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Melissa. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Frank?
And I say aye.
Thank you, Frank. And that motion again passes on a 4-0 vote. Michelle? Thanks, Dave. We will switch gears and move over to our Assistant City Manager and Finance Director. We have 2 items on the agenda this evening. Our first being our quarterly review of the city's financial report and status for fiscal year 2019. Dana.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Mulfield and City Councilors. You can find my staff reports and the quarterly reports on page 145 of your packet. I'll just briefly go over some of the information. Overall, during the first quarter of fiscal year 19, the total cash and property tax supported funds increased by about 7.1% compared to the prior first quarter. There's varying differences among each of those funds. We have 5 funds that are included in that total, with some that had good increases and some that had pretty significant decreases. So I'm going to just touch on the larger ones so that we don't take too much time this evening, but all the information is provided for you in this report. So the general fund cash balance actually compared to a year ago is up 93%, and that sounds a lot. It is $184,000. But that is mostly due to us starting the fiscal year off with a higher cash balance than the prior year. So as we continue to increase cash reserves, we'll see that amount increase during the first quarter. Two of the funds actually had decreases, and I think it's important to just touch on those to put people's minds at ease. The library fund did have a decrease of around $25,000 from the last quarter at this time. However, again, this has to do with the cash balance starting off about $28,000 less than the prior year. We are anticipating a decrease in the library fund based on the budget. This is planned, a planned spend down of cash to help address the capital improvement needs of that facility. It's an older building, and the likelihood of us actually spending all those funds, I would say, is minimal. We often end with a higher cash balance than budgeted. So at this time, I have no concerns for the library fund. The fire and ambulance fund, that one is going to be a bit of a shocker because it's quite opposite of what happened to the general fund. But again, it's this cash balance and where we're starting the year off. So last year, as you know, during the budget season, the fire and ambulance fund did start the year off with about $170,000 less than the prior year, partly due to cash funding a newer ambulance, a portion of a new ambulance, as well as some write-offs for Medicare and Medicaid. As we increase the billings that we do and increase the charges for service, Medicare and Medicaid, they don't really care. So they're going to keep us with the write-offs related to those, as well as we did just recently switch processing companies for our ambulance billing. We are hopeful that we will have about 10% more 10% or more increased collections. So far has been really good. So, we'll give you an update mid-year. We've only been with them about 6 months, so it's a little difficult to see yet. Overall, though, the city's property tax supported funds remain in good financial condition. Again, we'll always push this every time, but increasing cash reserves to 20% is important as we prepare for the next economic downturn, and then we can strive to eliminate these temporary loans that we're having to do. So when the fire fund actually has a negative cash balance, we are borrowing funds from general to make any payments. But again, that we're considering that to be temporary. I do think that fund will return to into the black, I guess, as many would reference. Some good financial highlights. I'll just go through real quick. The municipal court fines and forfeitures we've seen continue to increase, and I think that's really great. We were on a pretty steady downturn with municipal court fines, and over the past year and a half, we've seen them increase, and Judge Heilman has continued that trend, along with, I think there's other factors, the number of police calls, the response, our amazing in-house prosecutor, who's sitting in the back of the room tonight. All of those follow through the whole process, I think really helps us in collections. Resort tax collections are 41% of the fiscal year 19 budget, so that's great news. Again, we're seeing those increase every year, and so hopefully we can keep this trend up as we look toward maybe additional property tax relief in fiscal year 20. Ambulance service charges are up 31%, are 31% of the budget and up about 4%. So that is due to our annual CPI increase that went into effect July 1. Of course, we always talk about building. We're seeing a lot of projects come through here. We are up as of the end of the first quarter about 14% from the prior year, and that's totaling 36% of the fiscal year 19 budget so far. So that's a really positive and strong start to the year. Columbia Falls contract, interesting enough, they actually have had a decrease over the first quarter, but it is tracking with other years. It would appear last year was somewhat of an anomaly for them. Sure Dave might know more about that than I do, or Tad. Impact fee revenue, again, trends with building permits. So we did see during the first quarter, our impact fees have basically met their budget. I think what we maybe didn't anticipate, or I didn't anticipate in the budget, was some of these significant projects that have come through and the timing of those collections. So there's actually simply 2 larger developments that paid some of their building permits and impact fees, and that's where we're seeing those. Now, pending next meeting on consideration for impact fee rate updates, we'll see those impact fee rates potentially and the revenue collected change over the next 6 months, assuming it goes into effect January 1. And we'll just have to try to budget for that in the next year. Investment earnings continue to increase, and they have exceeded the prior year first quarter by almost $50,000. So in good economic times, with the returns increasing, the feds keep doing rate hikes. We're expecting probably another 2, another one by the end of the year, and then probably 1 or 2 in the next year. Then kind of the forecast is that it's going to stall out. So we'll see. The problem with increased returns is if you are doing any borrowing, it comes at a higher cost. But we have minimal borrowing, I would say, just with the wastewater treatment plant that we're considering, and the state tends to have the best rates. So, but that's good news. I mean, obviously, it's some extra cash flow that helps out for us during this time. Expenditures by fund were all at or below the anticipated percentage of budget to be used, so no concerns there. Really? So overall, the city's finances remain in really good condition. We'll monitor some areas, of course, over time, repair, maintenance, and supplies. But we, again, are seeing quite a few increases in investments, resort tax, building revenue. So I think FY19 is shaping up to be a really good year. So, thank you.
Thanks, Dana. Any questions for Dana? Richard?
Dana, is the building code fund, that increase or that those increased revenues, is the new elementary school rolled into that yet, or is that, do you know?
I'm not sure if that
I don't.
yet,
think
but
so.
maybe.
Those money, so that would be another big chunk of
It's gonna
change,
be-
I would
yep,
think.
Yeah, the ones that I noticed, I think, was Altaviews, and then one on Colorado, I think, with Wisconsin maybe?
So
or
yeah, that
Colorado?
did come through the
Oh, it
building
did.
permit for the
Okay,
elementary school, at least the foundation.
maybe just the foundation.
The civil,
though.
oh, sorry, civil site work came through. I don't know about the actual vertical component, but any of the impact fees related to at least water and sewer and stormwater should have come through.
Okay. I was just curious,
Yeah.
where that money was coming from.
Thanks, Dana.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. We will stay with Dana and move on to item 9B, which is review and hopeful adoption of our FY19 through FY23 capital improvement program.
Great. Thank you. So my staff report is found on page 153 of the packet, and the capital improvements program begins on page 154. So at the October 15th work session, staff reviewed the proposed CIP that is in your packet and provided information regarding a few updates. Back in August with the fiscal year 19 budget, the capital improvements program was adopted with knowing that there were likely changes. This is a flexible planning document that changes with economic conditions or project changes. We bring this to you annually now, but also when we have some significant updates. And that's actually what has occurred, although not necessarily planned right away. It's important that we keep this updated as much as possible. So since it was adopted, there are, I would say, 2 significant changes that affect actually 3 projects in the CIP. The first is State Park Road. It's a resort tax project, and it has a significant stormwater portion that is going to require additional funds. Staff, we discussed it back and forth multiple times, and at one point, we actually pulled probably about, I'd say it's like $1.5 million from the stormwater CIP, thinking that, well, the resort tax, it shouldn't be that big of a project. Well, it turns out that it's actually a pretty big part of it, but we've added that to actually resort tax funding. What that's done is it's provided for the project to still be completed within the same time frame as originally anticipated. It's not affecting future projects, so it's really not going to be a big impact. Again, the Resort Tax Monitoring Committee is looking at reassessing and reprioritizing street projects after State Park, so we'll still be, those changes might occur as well. The second major change, which is probably one of the more important changes, at the work session, Craig described some of the results of our consulting engineers on our water tank south of, South Whitefish water tank project. And what came of that discussion was that we have a bigger project than maybe what we had anticipated. That the water tank on the south side of town and the water treatment facility likely need to have more funds to address the need for water capacity. So in doing so, the water capital improvements program now includes an additional $10 million. So we added it to both projects within the CIP, kind of split it. Again, whether there's a water tank or there's other changes, not quite sure. This is the best estimate we have to date. Why that is important for you to consider tonight is that at the next council meeting, we'll be bringing forward impact fee recommendations. And in that impact fee update report, it did not include the $10 million needed for capacity enhancements. So by adopting the capital improvements program this evening with that $10 million, it does change the calculation for impact fees. I've ran through those calculations. It does increase it significantly to over $3,000 for a single family residents, average single-family residents. However, because these are estimated numbers, staff is going to recommend at the next meeting that they just stay the same where we're at today and not reduce them, because that's the proposal, or the calculated maximum defensible amount in the impact fee update is actually a reduction from where we're at. So with this information, though, and by adopting this new capital improvements program, we will include that in our analysis and recommendation at the next meeting. Because those are still very estimated figures, the funding sources that we've put into the capital improvement program is just bonds, revenue bonds. Obviously, as we get into the finer details, we can determine how that's going to affect future rate increases and where the council wants to move forward there. But again, to remind you, this is a very flexible document, and it changes. It changes annually. Obviously, if we get information that's very important from the additional work from the consultants, then we can also bring this forward to you as well. So with that, if you have any questions on a specific project within the CIP, since we went through it at the last work session, I'm not going to go through each tab, but I'm happy to answer any questions, address any projects that you may have questions about. But staff does respectfully recommend that the City Council adopt the FY19 to FY23 Capital Improvements Program as presented.
Thanks, Dana, very much. Any questions for Dana? Or staff, for that matter? Not seeing any. We do need a motion for approval, considering we'll be considering adoption of the impact fee schedule at the next meeting.
I'll move to adopt the FY19 to FY23 Capital Improvements Program as presented.
Thanks, Melissa. Is there a second to the motion?
Is Frank in there?
Frank, are you there still?
I'm here. Hi.
Did you want to second that, Frank? I was going to give you the opportunity, otherwise I will.
Oh, yes, I would like to second it then.
Just making sure you're there. Seconded by Councillor Sweeney. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Frank?
And I vote aye.
Thank you, Frank. And that motion passes on a 4-0 vote. Thanks very much, Dana. We'll move on to communications from our city manager. You have Adam's report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Adam on his update? Adam, anything additional to report on?
You know, I think the only thing I want to add is I just want to express my appreciation to the community for a job well done on Halloween. I thought we had a great turnout even in the rainy weather. I noticed some great costumes out there. I want to congratulate Maria and her staff on a job well done at the Baki Nature Preserve in providing trick-or-treat opportunities for those 5 and under. I thought that went well, and I think you're planning on doing it every year, so it's just liable to increase. So thankful to the community and to staff for a job well done.
Thanks, Adam. We will move on to item 11A. I'll tackle this one for us, which was our consideration of appointments to the volunteer boards and committees not made during the special session that we held prior to the regular scheduled meeting. The council did move forward and appoint Mike Kelly to his 3rd term for the Board of Adjustment. We have the Climate Action Standing Committee that was formulated via ordinance. We had 4 applicants for the 5 members at large positions. It's turned out that 2 of those applicants who served on the original committee, Adam, are not city residents, so I would like to see that ordinance amended so that we lift the restriction or change the membership requirements to allow for non-city residents to participate. So if possible, if we could bring that back to the November 19th meeting, that would be timely. In addition, as part of that committee, we also delegated to staff to appoint 3 staff members. So if we could have those recommendations ready for the November 19th meeting, in addition to an ad hoc member, which I believe we delegated to staff's discretion as well, that would allow me to move forward both with the revised ordinance in at least 4 of the 5 member at large positions, city staff, the ad hoc, and our city council appointment, which will be Melissa at the November 19th meeting. Moving on, at the planning board, we did have 6 applicants for 4 positions. We have an additional applicant interviewing on November 19th, so we've held off on making those appointments, but plan to at the November 19th meeting. And finally, just a reminder to the general public who may be watching, we have numerous vacancies on our city committees and boards. We have 1 opening available on the Architectural Review Committee. We have 1 position open on the Board of Appeals. We have 1 position open on Whitefish Lakeshore Protection Committee. We have 1 opening on the Housing Authority, 1 position open on the Impact Fee Advisory Committee, and then finally 2 available positions and openings on the Board of Adjustment. So if you are interested and you are listening, you can submit your letters of interest directly to our city clerk, Michelle Hauk, here at City Hall. With that said, we'll start with council comments, and we will start with Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only thing I have is that tomorrow is Election Day, and there's no more important thing that we do in this country, I think, as citizens, and it is our duty and our responsibility to vote. And so I encourage everyone in our listening audience and in our audience that is here this evening to be sure to vote if you have not already done so, and if you are curious as to whether or not your early absentee ballot has made it through the process, at least gotten to the office, you can check online, and it will record. You'll find out on your smart device that you have or have not, your ballot has been received. And secondly, if you are not registered and you still want to vote, you can go down to the courthouse and register and vote. It'll be a provisional ballot, but that's your chance to be part of the important process of a democracy.
Thank you, Richard. Ryan?
No comment.
Thanks, Ryan. Melissa?
No comment.
I don't think I have any additional comments either. Does staff have any? Frank, excuse me. Didn't see you there. Any comment tonight?
Yeah, they didn't even bother to put a bobblehead in my place there. That's okay. I have no additional comments this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to participate, even at long distance, that we can make some improvements to this system so that it's a little less clipped in terms of the voice that I hear anyway. But it was great to be able to participate, and thank you, John, for allowing me to do so. Thank you.
Well, thanks for taking the time, and please drive safe on your way home tomorrow. Anything further from staff? Council, on that note, we are adjourned. Thanks very much. Thanks, Frank.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Good night, Frank.
Hey, Frank.